I saw Sheriff Miller shove a man into the trunk of his car behind the abandoned mill on my evening walk. The man's muffled cry was cut short by the slam of the lid. My hand flew to my mouth, and I ducked behind the thick trunk of a pine tree, my knees trembling. He couldn't see me. Not here. Not now. I had to get home and call my son, David. He'd know what to do. But my phone was dead, and the sheriff's cruiser was still parked there, engine off, waiting in the twilight. I had to move before he finished whatever he was doing and drove away. I had to reach my house, charge my phone, and call for help without being seen. If he spotted me, I was next. My own safety was at stake. I crept backward, twigs snapping under my feet, sounding like gunshots in the quiet woods. Just as I reached the edge of the tree line, a flashlight beam swept across the path ahead. I froze. It was him. He was walking toward the mill's rear entrance, but he paused, listening. My breath hitched. Then his radio crackled to life, and he turned back to his car. I used the distraction to hurry down the familiar path toward home, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When I finally reached my back door, fumbling with the keys, I saw a note taped to the glass. It was from Sheriff Miller, asking if I'd seen anything unusual near the mill tonight and to call him immediately. He'd been here, at my house, while I was watching him. I tore the note down, my hands shaking. Calling him was out of the question. I needed a lawyer, not a conversation with a murderer. I needed to secure legal advice before the sheriff could spin his story. I plugged in my phone and dialed my daughter, Sarah. She worked at a law firm in the city. She'd know who to trust. The phone rang and rang. No answer. I left a voicemail, my voice unnaturally high. Next, I tried David again. This time he picked up. "Mom? Everything all right?" I spilled it all, the words tumbling out about the sheriff and the trunk. There was a long silence. "Mom?" he said slowly. "Are you sure? Maybe it was just someone loading equipment. You know your eyes aren't what they used to be." The dismissal felt like a physical blow. My age made them doubt me. I insisted, my voice firm now. He sighed. Okay. I'll come over tomorrow. Don't do anything until then." After he hung up, the pressure mounted. I was alone with this. I went to the window and peered out. A sheriff's department car was parked across the street, engine off, but someone was inside, watching. My house no longer felt safe. I needed proof. I remembered the old digital camera I used for birdwatching. It had a long lens. If I could get a photo from my upstairs window. I crept upstairs, camera in hand. The cruiser was still there. I focused the lens, my finger on the shutter. But the car door opened, and Sheriff Miller himself stepped out. He looked directly up at my window and gave a small, cold smile before getting back in and driving away. He knew I was watching. He wanted me to know. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house was him coming back. I had to survive the night and get to a public place in the morning. I needed witnesses. I decided to go to the senior center for my usual Thursday breakfast. Surely he wouldn't try anything there. At dawn, I dressed carefully, my movements slow. This fear left me with a deep, bone-tired exhaustion I hadn't felt in years. I called a taxi, not trusting my own car. When I arrived, the center was buzzing with the usual gossip. I found a seat near the window, my back to the wall. Mrs. Gable from next door sat down with her coffee. "Eleanor, you look pale. Everything okay?" I almost told her. The words were on my tongue. But then I saw Sheriff Miller walk in, his uniform crisp. He made a beeline for our table. "Ladies," he said, his voice overly cheerful. He leaned close to me, his hand gripping my shoulder too tightly. Eleanor, I'm glad I caught you. We found some concerning things near the mill, drug paraphernalia. We're worried someone in the area might be involved. You haven't seen anything, have you? He was planting a seed, making me look unstable or criminal. The pressure was immense, his presence suffocating. I forced a smile. No, Sheriff. Nothing. He patted my shoulder, his eyes hard. Good. We'll be keeping a close eye on the neighborhood. As he walked away, Mrs. Gable gave me a strange, pitying look. I'd just been marked. I had to act. I needed to find concrete evidence against the sheriff before he completely destroyed my credibility. I needed to get back to the mill. After breakfast, I told the taxi to drop me off at the library, a block from home. I'd walk from there and hopefully slip into the woods unnoticed. My sense of security was dwindling. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. As I walked toward my street, a black sedan pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and a man in a suit I didn't recognize smiled thinly. Mrs. Eleanor Reed? I'm from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report concerning your well-being. Would you mind answering a few questions? My blood ran cold. The sheriff had already moved. This was his pressure, using the system against me. I kept walking, my pace quickening. I'm fine. Thank you. He drove slowly alongside me. The report mentions confusion, paranoia. We just want to help. I felt the eyes of neighbors on their porches. He was painting a picture for them. I stopped and faced him. I have never been more clear-headed in my life. Now please, leave me alone. He nodded, still smiling, and drove off. I finally reached my house, my heart hammering. On my porch was a large, official-looking envelope. It was from my bank, stating that a hold had been placed on my accounts due to potential financial exploitation and that a guardian ad litem would be appointed. He wasn't just coming for my freedom. He was coming for everything I owned. I stood on my porch, the bank letter crumpled in my fist. My priorities changed instantly. It was no longer about proving what I saw. It was about protecting what was left. I had to secure my assets before some court-appointed stranger could hand them over. I went inside and straight to the fireproof box where I kept important documents. My will, the deed to the house, power of attorney papers I'd given to David years ago. I needed to revoke that now. I was losing the trust I'd placed in my own son, who hadn't believed me. I found the power of attorney form and a pen. My hand was steady as I wrote "revoked" across it in large letters. Next, I needed a new lawyer, one who had no ties to the sheriff. I remembered an old friend, Martha, whose son was the attorney in the next county. I called her, my voice low and urgent. She listened, really listened, and promised to have her son call me within the hour. The pressure was a ticking clock. I knew the sheriff's next move would be faster. As I hung up, my doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole. It was David, his face a mask of concern. "Mom, open up. We need to talk about this situation." I took a deep breath. I loved my son, but he was part of the problem now. I unlocked the door. He stepped in, but he wasn't alone. Standing right behind him, with a look of fake sympathy, was Sheriff Miller. I stood frozen, holding the door open for my son and the man who wanted to bury me. David stepped inside, his face creased with worry. "Mum, Sheriff Miller is here to help." The sheriff followed, filling my small hallway with his imposing presence and a false, concerned smile. I had to get through this conversation without revealing my revulsion or my plans. I needed to play the confused old woman. just enough to make them lower their guard. It meant swallowing my fury and pretending to trust the man who destroyed my peace. Eleanor, the sheriff began, his voice soft as a snake's whisper. David tells me you're having some episodes, seeing things that aren't there. David looked at me, pleading. He says it's not uncommon, Mom. Stress, maybe. The pressure was immense, both of them in my home, backing me into a corner. I let my shoulders slump, feigning defeat. My memory isn't what it was, I murmured, avoiding their eyes. I saw the sheriff's slight nod of satisfaction, but as I turned to lead them to the living room, I discreetly pressed the record button on the old voice-activated recorder I kept in my apron pocket for noting grocery lists. If they were going to plot against me in my own house, I'd have a record of it. We sat down, and the sheriff leaned forward. For your own safety, Eleanor, we think it's best if you come stay with David for a while, just until we sort this all out. I knew what that meant. Once I was out, he'd have access to everything. I was about to respond when my recorder let out a loud, low battery beep. 3 short, piercing sounds. Both men looked at me. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his friendly mask slipping for a single terrifying second. He knew. I patted my pocket, forcing a shaky laugh. Oh, that's my medication reminder? So forgetful. The lie felt thin as tissue paper. The sheriff's eyes stayed on my pocket, calculating. David, ever oblivious, just looked relieved. See, Mom? That's what we're talking about. You need help. I had to get them out, now. I had to end this visit before the sheriff could push further into my life. I stood up, using the furniture for support, playing up my age. I'm very tired, David. This has all been too much. I think I need to lie down. Their condescending looks were hard to bear, but it was working. David stood, ready to leave. The sheriff rose slowly, his gaze sweeping my living room, lingering on the desk where my documents lay. Of course, Eleanor. We just want what's best for you. He walked to the door, but then he stopped and turned back, his voice dropping so only I could hear. By the way, we identified the man from the mill, a known drug dealer. It's a shame, but the world's a better place. He smiled that cold smile again and followed David out. I locked the door, my hands trembling not from fear, but from rage. He was taunting me, confessing without confessing. I pulled the recorder from my pocket. The battery was dead. It had beeped, but it hadn't saved a single word. I was still without proof, and now he knew I was trying to get some. I went to the window and saw them talking by David's car. David was nodding, his head bowed. Then he got in his car and drove away. Sheriff Miller didn't. He stood there for a long moment, looking directly at my house, before pulling out his phone and making a call. I didn't need to hear the words to know he was setting his next move in motion. I had to move faster than him. First, I needed to get that new lawyer. Martha's son, Robert, called within the hour, just as she'd promised. His voice was calm and professional as I explained the situation, leaving out the murder for now and focusing on the sheriff's harassment and the false APS report. They're trying to declare me incompetent, I said, my voice tight. He listened intently. We can file a preemptive motion to block any guardianship petition, but we need a psychiatric evaluation from an independent doctor to counter their claims. It was a sensible legal step, but it meant exposing myself to another stranger, another evaluation. It meant sacrificing my privacy and my pride. I agreed immediately. I'll have my assistant email you the details of a trusted colleague in your area, Robert said. Do not speak to APS or the sheriff without me present. I felt a constant urgency, like a ticking clock in my head. After I hung up, I felt a sliver of hope for the first time in days. I had an ally. I went to my computer to check for the email, but a message window popped up from my grandson, Jake. "Grandma, are you okay? Dad says you're sick and saying crazy stuff about Sheriff Miller." My heart broke a little. This was his true tactic, isolating me from those I loved. I typed back carefully. "I'm fine, honey. Just a misunderstanding. I love you." I hit send just as my doorbell rang again. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a crisp suit holding a clipboard. APS. They were here for the evaluation already. That was impossibly fast. Unless the sheriff had called them directly from my driveway. I didn't answer. I stood silently, watching her. She waited, then slipped a formal-looking document into my mailbox and left. I waited until her car was gone before retrieving it. It was a notice for a competency hearing, scheduled for just 3 days from now. The sheriff wasn't wasting any time. He planned to have me declared unfit and locked away by the end of the week. The formal notice in my hands made it all terrifyingly real. I had 3 days to prove I was sane. I needed to see the independent doctor and get a clean bill of mental health before the hearing. I called the number Robert's office had provided and booked an appointment for the next morning. It used up the last of my emergency cash for the taxi fare and the copay. With my accounts frozen, every dollar counted now. I spent the rest of the day gathering every document I could find that proved my capability. Tax returns I'd filed myself, records from the community college course I'd audited last year, letters from friends. I was building my defense, but it felt like trying to prove I could breathe. A constant squeezing weight pressed on my chest from the stress. That evening, as I was heating up some soup, my phone rang. It was my daughter, Sarah. Finally. "Mum, I got your messages? What is going on? David is saying you're having a psychotic break." Her voice was sharp, with alarm and disbelief. I took a deep breath, trying to sound calm and measured. I told her everything, from the moment I saw the sheriff at the mill to the notice in my mailbox. There was a long silence on the other end. "Mum," she said, her voice much softer now, laced with a dread I recognized. "A man from the sheriff's department called my office today. He was asking about your history of mental instability. He said you'd been struggling since Dad died." They were digging up my grief and weaponizing it. This cruel turn of events stole my breath. Sarah, the pragmatic one, was now caught in the sheriff's web. "I have to go, Mom. I need to think." She hung up. I was left standing in my silent kitchen, more alone than I had ever been. The soup boiled over on the stove, hissing and sputtering, a perfect mirror of the chaos spilling into my life. The next morning, I took a taxi across town to the psychiatrist's office. I had to make this count. I aimed to be so lucid, so composed, that no one could ever doubt my sanity again. I walked into the quiet, tastefully decorated waiting room, my back straight. It took every ounce of my emotional energy to maintain this performance. I filled out the forms with my steady, cursive hand. I was called in to see Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told my story clearly, from the beginning. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I presented the facts as I would to a jury. She listened, taking notes. "That is a very serious allegation, Mrs. Reed," she said quietly. "And the stress of such an event could certainly manifest in ways others might misinterpret." I felt a flicker of hope. She understood. The weight of the impending hearing began to ease, just a little. The session lasted nearly an hour. As it ended, she smiled. "I see no signs of cognitive decline or psychosis, Eleanor. I will write a very strong report for your attorney." I thanked her, feeling a weight lift. I had done it. I walked out of her office feeling stronger than I had in days. I called for a taxi and stood on the curb, breathing in the cool air. A county works truck pulled up beside me. Two men got out and started putting up orange traffic cones and a road closed sign at the end of the street. One of them saw me looking. "Water main break, ma'am. This whole block's being shut down for repair. Gonna be a few days." He didn't look me in the eye. I looked down the street. It was perfectly dry. There was no break. They were cutting off my access, isolating me. My newfound confidence shattered. The sheriff's reach was longer than I had imagined, and my quiet street was now a dead end. I stood on the curb, watching the men pretend to work on a non-existent water main. My street was now a cage. I had to find a way out of this blockade before my hearing in 2 days. I needed to reach Robert's office, or at least get a message to him about this new development. I felt my sense of safety dwindling. My own home had become a prison under the sheriff's watch. I walked back to my house, forcing my steps to be slow and casual, as if I hadn't a care in the world. Inside, I locked the door and went to the landline phone. I dialed Robert's number, but the line was dead. No dial tone. I checked the connection. The cord was firmly plugged in. He had cut my phone line. The pressure was closing in from all sides. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. My cell phone had no service here, a dead zone I'd complained about for years. I was completely cut off. I went to the backyard, thinking I might slip through the neighbor's fence, but from my kitchen window, I saw a sheriff's deputy parked in the alley, casually reading a newspaper. They had thought of everything. I was trapped. Just then, I heard a faint tapping at my back door. I froze, expecting the worst. But it was my grandson, Jake, peering through the glass, his face pale and worried. He must have come through the woods behind the houses. I hurried to let him in. "Grandma, Dad said you're not well, but I saw the cops blocking the street." "What's really going on?" he whispered. I pulled him inside, my heart swelling with a mix of fear and hope. He was my only link to the outside world now. But as I started to explain, we both heard the distinct sound of a car door slamming out front. Jake peeked through the front window curtain. "It's Sheriff Miller," he said, his voice tight. "And he's with 2 guys in suits." They were at my door, and Jake was here with me. If they found him, they might drag him into this, using him against me. I pushed Jake toward the basement stairs. "Hide, and don't make a sound," I hissed. He obeyed, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. I closed the basement door just as the doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking. I took a deep breath, smoothed my apron, and opened the door. Sheriff Miller stood there, flanked by the 2 men from APS. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We're here for a wellness check. We've had reports you're in distress." I forced a calm smile. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you. As you can see, I'm just tidying up." One of the suits, a tall man with a clipboard, stepped forward. "Mrs. Reed, we need to come in and assess the living conditions. It's standard procedure. I needed to keep them out, to protect Jake and buy time. Letting them in meant giving them a chance to plant evidence or declare my home unsafe." I felt intense anxiety during this confrontation, my hands trembling behind my back. "I'm sorry, but now isn't a good time," I said firmly. The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Eleanor, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Let us in, or we'll have to get a warrant." I felt immense pressure, his authority a blunt weapon. I knew he could make that happen. I had to think fast. I stepped aside. Of course, come in. But please be quick. I was about to lie down. They filed in, their eyes scanning everything. The sheriff made a show of looking around, opening cupboard doors in the kitchen. Just checking for hazards, he said. Then he walked toward the basement door. My heart stopped. He reached for the knob, but just as his hand touched it, his radio crackled. Sheriff, we have a situation at the mill. A reporter is nosing around. He froze, his face darkening. He backed away from the basement door and glared at me. This isn't over, he muttered, then ushered the APS men out. I locked the door behind them, my legs weak with relief. But the reporter at the mill, that was my turn. Someone else was asking questions. I hurried to the basement to check on Jake, but he was gone. The small basement window was open. He'd slipped out. On the floor beneath the window was a note he'd scribbled on a scrap of paper. Believe you, Grandma. Getting help. He was on my side, and he was taking action. Jake's note was a lifeline. I needed to survive until he could bring help and ensure the psychiatrist's report reached Robert. I needed to get off this street. With the phone dead and my cell useless, I had to find another way. It drained my physical energy. I felt every one of my 72 years in the ache of my bones. I went to my bedroom and retrieved the emergency cash I kept hidden in an old Bible. $300. It was enough for a bus ticket and a room somewhere, but I had to get to the bus station first. I felt constant pressure from the surveillance. I knew the deputy was still in the alley. I packed a small bag with essentials, my heart pounding. I couldn't leave through the front or back. Then I remembered old Mrs. Gable's house next door. We had a shared crawl space between our basements, a remnant from when the houses were built. She was away visiting her sister. If I could get into her basement, I could leave through her house, which faced a different street. It was a risk. If I was caught, it would look like I was breaking in, proving their point about my instability. I waited until dusk, when the light was fading. I slipped into my basement, moved some stored boxes, and found the small, dusty access panel. It was tight, but I squeezed through, dragging my bag behind me. I emerged in Mrs. Gable's dark, silent basement. I crept up the stairs and peered out her front window. No deputies in sight. Her street was open. This was my chance. I unlocked her front door and stepped out, trying to look like a visiting relative. I walked briskly toward the main road, my bag feeling heavier with each step. I needed to find a payphone or a store with a public phone to call Robert. I reached the corner store a few blocks away, the one with the blue awning. I went inside and asked the clerk for the payphone. He pointed to the back. I dialed Robert's number, my coins clinking. He answered on the first ring. Eleanor? Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. The court moved your hearing up to tomorrow morning. The ground felt like it shifted under my feet. They had accelerated their plan. I had to be in that courtroom, with that report, or I would lose everything. I gripped the payphone, the receiver slick in my hand. Tomorrow? But the doctor's report. Robert cut me off. I know. I'll have my assistant pick it up first thing. Where can you stay tonight? You can't go home. I needed to find a safe place for the night and get to the courthouse by 9 a.m. without being intercepted by the sheriff. I was utterly exhausted and afraid of being found. I'll find a motel, I said, my voice shaky. Call me when you have the report. I hung up and used the last of my change to buy a bottle of water and a granola bar from the store. I needed to keep my strength up. I walked to the bus stop, keeping my head down. I caught a bus to the other side of town, to a quiet, budget motel I remembered from years ago. I paid in cash for a room, giving a false name. The room was shabby but clean. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, too wired to sleep. I felt a constant hum of pressure in my veins. I turned on the small TV for noise, flipping to the local news. And there it was. A reporter was standing in front of the abandoned mill. Authorities are tight-lipped, but sources confirm an ongoing investigation into the disappearance of a local man, though Sheriff Miller insists there is no evidence of foul play. The screen then cut to a photo of the sheriff, looking earnest and trustworthy. The news anchor moved on to the next story. So, Jake had talked to a reporter, but the sheriff was controlling the narrative. It was a small crack, but not enough. I needed that psychiatric report to be ironclad. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. Around 2 a.m., my motel room phone rang. I jolted upright. No one knew I was here. I picked it up cautiously. Hello? It was Jake, his voice a frantic whisper. Grandma, I'm at a friend's. I talked to a reporter, but the sheriff found out. He came to the house looking for me. Dad's really mad. He said if I see you, I should call him immediately. My heart ached. They were turning my own family against me, using fear and lies. I told Jake I was safe and to stay away for now. After I hung up, I realized the call had been traced. The motel phone. It was under the front desk's control. I had to move. Now. I threw my things back into my bag and slipped out of the motel room. The parking lot was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows. I had to find another place to hide for the few hours until the hearing. I needed to stay free and reach the courthouse unseen. It was a relentless, draining game of cat and mouse. I started walking toward the town center, where the courthouse was. I couldn't risk another motel. I found an all-night diner a mile away, the kind with bright lights and truckers at the counter. I went in, ordered coffee, and took a booth in the back corner. I'd wait here until it was time. I felt the pressure of the clock on the wall, each tick bringing me closer to my judgment. I sipped the bitter coffee, my mind racing. What if the report wasn't enough? What if the sheriff had influenced the court already? At 6 a.m., my cell phone, which had no service at home, miraculously buzzed in my purse. 1 bar of signal. A text from an unknown number. The report is in my hands. Meet me at the courthouse steps at 8:30. Robert. Relief washed over me. He had it. But as I put the phone away, I saw a sheriff's cruiser slow down as it passed the diner. It didn't stop, but the driver looked right at me through the window. They were still looking. I paid my bill and left, deciding to walk the rest of the way to kill time. I took side streets, my bag feeling like a beacon. As I turned a corner near the courthouse, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. It was David's car, and he was standing beside it, talking intently to Sheriff Miller, my own son, conspiring with the man who wanted to destroy me. They hadn't seen me yet. I ducked into a narrow alley between 2 buildings, my heart hammering. I was so close. But now I had to get past my son and the sheriff to reach my lawyer and my freedom. I pressed myself against the cold brick wall of the alley, the rough surface scratching through my thin jacket. David and Sheriff Miller stood by David's car, their voices a low, urgent murmur that carried in the quiet morning air. I had to get to Robert on the courthouse steps without them seeing me. If they caught me now, they might invent a reason to detain me, and I'd miss the hearing that decided my future. It was devastating. Seeing my own son conspiring with the man who threatened to destroy me felt like a physical blow to my chest. My knees ached from the tension, a reminder of my age and vulnerability. Miller gestured broadly, his face tight with anger, and David ran a hand through his hair, looking stressed and defeated. They were undoubtedly plotting how to handle me, the troublesome mother. I needed a clear path to Robert, who was probably waiting with the psychiatric report that proved my sanity. Just then, my phone vibrated in my purse, a sudden noise that made me jump. I carefully retrieved it, my fingers fumbling. A text from Jake. "I'm here. Look for the blue jacket near the east entrance." I peeked around the corner and spotted him, a splash of bright blue by the courthouse doors. He started waving his arms and shouting, "Help! Someone! My bike's been stolen!" People turned to look, and David and Miller shifted their attention toward the disturbance. This was my opening. I slipped out of the alley and moved quickly along the storefronts, keeping close to the buildings. My bag felt heavy, and every step was an effort of will. Robert stood on the steps, a thick manila folder in his hand. My lifeline. I was mere yards away when Sheriff Miller, alerted by the commotion, scanned the crowd and his eyes met mine. His expression hardened, and he started pushing through the gathering people toward me. I broke into a clumsy run, my breath coming in short gasps. Robert saw me and stepped down, reaching out. Just as I got to him, Miller's hand closed around my upper arm, his grip like iron. "Eleanor, you're coming with me," he said, his voice low and threatening. Robert stepped between us. "Sheriff, she has a court appointment. Release her immediately." For a moment, we were locked in a standoff. Then Miller's radio squawked, and a dispatcher's voice said, "Sheriff, you're needed at the station urgently. That reporter from the city is here with an attorney." Miller's jaw tightened. He let go of my arm but leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. "This isn't over," he whispered. Then he turned and strode away. I stood trembling, rubbing my arm where he'd held me. Robert handed me the folder. "We need to go in." But as I turned toward the courthouse doors, I caught David's eye from across the street. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked lost and worried, as if he'd just seen something that didn't fit the story he'd been told. Inside the courthouse, the hallway echoed with footsteps and low voices. Robert guided me to a wooden bench outside the courtroom. "The hearing is in 10 minutes. The judge is Judge Wilkins, and he's fair, but no nonsense." I clutched the folder containing Dr. Evans' report, my hands still shaking from the encounter outside. I had to walk into that room and prove I was competent, to stop the guardianship before it stripped me of my rights. Losing my dignity was hard. Having to defend my own mind in front of strangers felt humiliating, and the strain made my head pound. Robert reviewed the documents quietly. "The sheriff might testify against you, so be prepared for anything." The pressure was immense, a tight knot in my stomach. Just then, the courtroom doors opened, and Sheriff Miller walked out, followed by the 2 APS agents from yesterday. He gave me a cold, satisfied look before heading down the hall. My heart sank. Had he already influenced the judge? Robert stood up. "It's time." We entered the courtroom, a formal space with high ceilings and dark wood. Judge Wilkins sat at the bench, his expression stern. The APS lawyer, a young woman with sharp eyes, began presenting their case, citing erratic behavior and paranoia based on reports from Sheriff Miller and David. She mentioned the alleged incident at the mill as a hallucination. I kept my face calm, but inside, I was screaming. Then it was Robert's turn. He presented Dr. Evans' report, emphasizing her findings of full cognitive function and sound judgment. The judge listened intently. But when Robert called me to the stand, the APS lawyer objected. "Your Honor, we have a new witness who can speak to Mrs. Reed's mental state." The judge allowed it. The doors opened, and David walked in. He avoided my eyes as he took the stand. He started describing my confusion and unfounded accusations, his voice wavering. But then he paused, looking at me directly. But when I saw her today, she didn't look confused. She looked determined. He swallowed hard. And I remember now, Mom has always been the strongest person I know. The room fell silent. David's testimony had just shifted, but the judge called for a recess. As we filed out, Robert whispered, "That helped, but it's not over." In the hallway, David approached me, his eyes filled with tears. "Mum, I'm so sorry. Miller showed me fabricated evidence, but Jake made me see the truth." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Mum, I'm at the station with the reporter. We found something. Call me." But my phone died before I could read it fully. Back in the courtroom after the recess, the atmosphere was tense. Judge Wilkins announced he would review the evidence and reconvene after lunch for a decision. I had to use this time to connect with Sarah and find out what she had discovered. Robert and I found a quiet corner in the courthouse cafeteria. I borrowed his phone to call Sarah, but it went straight to voicemail. The wait was agonizing. Every minute felt like a lifetime, and the uncertainty was wearing me down. I needed to know what she had found that could break the sheriff's hold. Robert suggested we wait here, but the pressure mounted as I saw Sheriff Miller across the room, speaking quietly with the APS lawyer. He glanced our way, his expression unreadable. Just as I was about to give up, Jake hurried into the cafeteria, his face flushed. "Grandma, I found you. Sarah sent me. She's at the police station with that reporter. They pulled the security camera footage from the street near the mill on the night you saw everything." My breath caught. "What did it show?" Jake lowered his voice. "It's blurry, but you can see the sheriff's car and someone being forced into the trunk. The timestamp matches when you were there. Sarah's making copies now." This was the proof I needed. But as Jake spoke, Sheriff Miller approached our table, his eyes narrowed. "Having a family reunion?" he said, his tone mocking. Robert stood up. "This is a private conversation, Sheriff." Miller smiled coldly. "I just came to inform you that I've filed an additional complaint about Eleanor's influence on her grandson here. Corruption of a minor." Jake bristled. "That's a lie." I placed a hand on his arm to calm him. Miller leaned in. "Drop this, Eleanor, or things will get much worse for your family." He walked away, leaving us shaken. Robert turned to me. "We need to get that footage to the judge immediately." But as we stood to leave, a court bailiff approached and handed Robert a note. "Judge Wilkins wants to see you in his chambers. Now." We exchanged worried glances. Was this about the new complaint? Or had the sheriff already gotten to him? In Judge Wilkins's chambers, the air was thick with tension. The judge sat behind a large desk, his hands steepled. "I've received some concerning new information," he began, looking directly at me. "Sheriff Miller has provided a statement from your son David, retracting his earlier comments and reaffirming his concerns about your mental state." My heart dropped. David had changed his story again? The pain from his wavering loyalty was deep and personal. I had to hold on to the hope of the security footage. Robert spoke calmly. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that corroborates Mrs. Reed's account. Security footage from the night in question." He explained about the footage from the mill. Judge Wilkins listened, his expression grave. "Where is this footage?" Just then, there was a knock on the door. Sarah entered, holding a USB drive. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Honor. I'm Eleanor's daughter. This is the footage, and I have a sworn statement from the camera's owner." She handed it to Robert, who passed it to the judge. The pressure eased slightly, but the sheriff's influence loomed large. Judge Wilkins inserted the drive into his computer and watched silently for a few minutes. His face remained neutral. This is compelling, but it's not conclusive. However, it does raise serious questions about Sheriff Miller's actions. He turned to me. Mrs. Reed, I am dismissing the guardianship petition. The evidence of your competence is clear, and these new developments warrant further investigation into the sheriff's conduct. Relief washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. But the judge wasn't done. However, I am issuing a temporary restraining order against Sheriff Miller regarding you and your family. He is not to contact you or approach your property until a full inquiry is completed. We thanked him and left the chambers. Outside, Sarah hugged me tightly. It's over, Mum. But as we walked out of the courthouse, I saw Sheriff Miller being served with the restraining order by a deputy. His face was a mask of pure rage. He didn't look at me. He stared at David, who was standing nearby, looking ashamed. Then Miller turned and got into his car, speeding away. David approached me, his head bowed. Mum, I'm so sorry. He threatened to take Jake away if I didn't cooperate. I nodded, too exhausted to speak, but as we stood there, my phone, now charged from Robert's car, rang. It was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. Eleanor, you need to come home. There are people here from the bank saying your house is in foreclosure. They have papers with your signature, but it doesn't look right. The relief from the courtroom vanished, replaced by a new cold dread. Foreclosure. I had paid off my mortgage years ago. I had to get home immediately to stop whatever was happening. Robert drove me, with Sarah and Jake following in another car. This new battle threatened my home itself, the place where I raised my children and held memories of my late husband. I felt a profound fatigue, as if I couldn't face another fight. As we turned onto my street, I saw the road closed signs were gone, but a bank van and two men in suits were on my porch, talking to Mrs. Gable. Robert parked, and we hurried over. One of the men held a clipboard with official-looking documents. Mrs. Reed, we're from the county trustee's office. We're here to post a foreclosure notice due to unpaid property taxes and a lien against the home. I stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. I've always paid my taxes on time. Robert stepped forward. Let me see those papers. He reviewed them quickly, his frown deepening. This signature is a forgery, and the lien is from a company I've never heard of. This is fraudulent. The pressure was back, sharper than ever. Sheriff Miller must have orchestrated this as a backup plan. One of the men shrugged. Our records show the debt is valid. You have 30 days to vacate or appeal. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a woman's voice said, Eleanor Reed, this is Detective Miles from the State Police. We're investigating Sheriff Miller based on a tip from a reporter. We need to speak with you about the footage from the mill. Hope flickered again. I explained about the foreclosure, and she said she'd look into it. After hanging up, I turned to Robert. What do we do? He was already on his phone, calling his contacts at the county recorder's office. We'll fight this, Eleanor, but it will take time. As the bank men left, Mrs. Gable handed me a envelope. This came for you yesterday, but with all the chaos, I forgot. It was from my insurance company, regarding a policy I had on the house. I opened it and found a letter stating that a large loan had been taken out against the policy, again with a forged signature. The sheriff had been busy, attacking my finances from every angle. I looked at my family gathered on the lawn, Sarah, Jake, and even David, who had driven up separately. We were together, but the war was far from over, and I knew Miller wouldn't stop until he silenced me for good. The foreclosure notice felt like a death sentence in my hands. I had to prove these documents were forgeries before the 30-day deadline passed, and I lost my home. Robert took photos of the papers with his phone, his face grim. "We'll need a handwriting expert and to file a fraud report with the county," he said. It was emotionally devastating. My safe place, filled with a lifetime of memories, was under attack, and the fatigue made my bones feel like lead. Sarah put an arm around me while Jake glared at the bank van driving away. David stood apart, shuffling his feet, his betrayal still a fresh wound. The pressure was immense. Sheriff Miller had used his position to create this financial trap, and I had to dismantle it piece by piece. Just then, my phone rang. It was Detective Miles from the state police. "Mrs. Reed, we've reviewed the footage. It's enough to open a formal investigation into Sheriff Miller for misconduct. We'd like you to come to the station to give a statement." Hope flickered, but it was a small flame in a vast darkness. I agreed to meet her in an hour. After hanging up, Mrs. Gable tugged at my sleeve. "Eleanor, I remember something. A man came to your door last week when you were out. He said he was from the tax office and needed your signature for a routine update. I told him to come back, but he left a form. It looked official." She hurried to her house and returned with a folded paper. It was a blank authorization form with a fake letterhead. Robert examined it. "This is how they might have gotten a sample of your signature to forge the others." This was a critical piece of the puzzle. We now had evidence of someone impersonating an official. But as we were talking, a sleek black car pulled up across the street. A woman in a sharp business suit got out and walked toward us, holding a tablet. "Eleanor Reed, I'm from Senior Safe Haven Financial Services. We show a default on a reverse mortgage taken out on this property. We're here to assess the value for liquidation." My blood ran cold. Another fake debt. Miller had woven a web of financial lies, and I was trapped in the center. I stood on my lawn, facing this new threat from Senior Safe Haven. I needed to expose all these fraudulent claims at once to clear my name and save my house. Robert stepped forward, his voice firm. "Ma'am, there is no reverse mortgage on this property. These documents are forgeries, and we are involving the police." The woman smiled thinly. "Our records are clear. If you have a dispute, you'll need to file an appeal with our legal department." It wasn't just about money. It was the erosion of my peace, every moment consumed by this battle. Sarah took my hand, her grip tight. "We're not going anywhere," she whispered. The pressure mounted as the woman began taking photos of my house with her tablet, as if it was already theirs. Jake moved to block her view. "You can't do that." She ignored him. Just then, David spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. I might know something. Sheriff Miller had me sign some papers for Mum's benefit a few weeks ago. I thought it was about power of attorney, but now I think he used them to forge these loans." He looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mum. I was scared." This admission was a turning point. David was finally on my side, but the damage was done. Robert quickly noted this down. "That helps us build a case of coercion and fraud." Detective Miles arrived then, stepping out of an unmarked car. She introduced herself and listened as we explained the new developments. She took the forged documents and David's statement. "This is serious. We'll expand our investigation to include financial crimes." As she was leaving, my phone buzzed with an alert from my home security system, which I'd forgotten about. The camera at my back door had triggered a motion alert. I pulled up the feed on my phone and saw a figure in a sheriff's deputy uniform placing a small box on my back step before hurrying away. The box was unmarked, and it was just sitting there. I showed the security footage to Detective Miles. "That's my back door. Someone just left a package." She immediately called for backup and advised us to stay back. I had to ensure my family was safe and find out what was in that box without risking anyone's safety. The constant, gnawing fear had become my normal, making every decision feel heavy. Robert herded us all inside my house, away from windows. The pressure was palpable. Miller was escalating, moving from paper threats to physical ones, even with the restraining order in place. Through the front window, I saw 2 state police cars pull up, officers fanning out around the house. Detective Miles and a bomb squad officer approached the back door cautiously. My heart pounded as I watched from the kitchen window. They used a robot to examine the box, and after a tense few minutes, the officer opened it. It was filled with old, shredded documents and a note that read, "Stop digging, or next time it won't be paper." It was a threat, but not an explosive. The relief was short-lived. Detective Miles came inside, holding the note in an evidence bag. "This is intimidation. We'll have patrols monitor your house, but you should consider staying elsewhere tonight." Sarah insisted I come to her apartment in the city. I agreed. I couldn't put my family in more danger. But as we were gathering a few things for me, my landline phone rang. I picked it up, and a distorted voice said, "You should have stayed out of it, old woman. Your grandson looks so much like his grandfather." Then the line went dead. They were threatening Jake now. My blood ran cold. I looked at Jake, who was helping David pack a bag, unaware. The game had changed. It was no longer just about me. The threat against Jake solidified my resolve. I had to end this now, not just for me, but for my family. I needed to work with Detective Miles to bring Miller down before he could harm anyone. We decided I would stay with Sarah, but first, I had to secure my house and gather any evidence inside. It was emotionally draining. Protecting my grandson gave me a fierce, burning energy, but my body ached with the strain. Robert arranged for a locksmith to change all my locks immediately. Detective Miles left an officer stationed outside Sarah's apartment for the night. The pressure was unrelenting. Miller knew he was under investigation and was getting desperate. As we were leaving my house, Mrs. Gable came over with a casserole dish. "For dinner," she said, then lowered her voice. "I saw that deputy earlier today, the one who's always with Miller. He was talking to a man in a suit near the mill." I wrote down the license plate. She handed me a napkin with a number scribbled on it. This was another piece of the puzzle, possibly linking Miller to his accomplices. I thanked her and passed it to Detective Miles. At Sarah's apartment, I tried to rest, but my mind raced. Later that evening, Detective Miles called. "We ran the plate. It's registered to a private investigator who has done work for the sheriff's department in the past. We're bringing him in for questioning." This was progress, but I knew Miller had deeper resources. Just as I was about to hang up, Sarah handed me her tablet. "Mum, look at this." It was a local news article reporting that Sheriff Miller was taking a leave of absence due to personal reasons. The article quoted him saying he needed time to deal with false accusations. He was stepping back, but it felt like a strategic retreat, not a surrender. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? The game is just beginning." It was from Miller. He was still out there, and he wasn't done. I stared at the text, my hands trembling. Miller's leave of absence was a ploy. He was buying time and planning his next move. I had to use this window to strengthen my case against him with the state police. I needed to gather all evidence and ensure he faced justice so my family could finally be safe. The sleepless nights and constant vigilance left me drained. Sarah made tea, and we sat at her kitchen table, going over everything we had. Robert joined us, bringing copies of the fraud reports he'd filed. The pressure was still there, a silent threat in every shadow. Jake was quiet, playing on his phone, but I saw him jump at every noise. I needed to protect him. Detective Miles called again. "The private investigator is talking. He admits Miller hired him to dig up dirt on you and to create the financial documents. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity." This was a major breakthrough. With his testimony, we could directly link Miller to the forgeries and intimidation. Robert smiled for the first time in days. This could be enough for an arrest warrant. But as we celebrated this small victory, David, who had been staying in the guest room, came out looking pale. "I just got a call from Miller's personal number. He didn't say anything, but he sent a photo." He showed me his phone. It was a picture of my house, taken from the woods behind it, with a red X drawn over it. It was a clear threat. Miller knew we were closing in, and he was warning us. I called Detective Miles immediately and forwarded the photo. She said they would increase patrols and try to trace the call. But I knew Miller was too smart for that. He was in the wind, and he had nothing left to lose. As I hung up, I looked at my family gathered in the small apartment. We were together, but we were all looking over our shoulders, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The text, the photo, the silent call. It all pointed to one thing. Miller wasn't finished with us yet. The photo of my house with a red X felt like a target on my back. I had to ensure my family's safety while helping the police catch Miller before he could act on his threat. We were all crammed into Sarah's small apartment, the air thick with fear. I needed to stay calm for them, but the constant anxiety was wearing me down, making my hands shake and my head ache. Detective Miles had officers watching the building, but Miller was clever and desperate. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with an email from Robert. He had received the full testimony from the private investigator, detailing how Miller ordered the forgeries and the surveillance on me. This was solid evidence, but it needed to be presented to a judge for an arrest warrant. The pressure was immense. Every minute felt like Miller was getting closer. Just as I was reading the email, Jake, who had been quiet all evening, looked up from his phone. "Grandma, I think I found something. I've been going through old posts on local community forums. Look at this." He showed me a photo from a year ago, taken at a town fair. It showed Sheriff Miller talking intensely with a man I recognized as the one he shoved into the trunk. The caption read, "Sheriff Miller and local businessman Mark Tolbert discussing community safety." My breath caught. This connected them publicly. It was another piece of the puzzle, suggesting a motive. But as I was absorbing this, the power in Sarah's apartment suddenly went out, plunging us into darkness. We all froze. Through the window, I saw the streetlights were still on. This wasn't a citywide outage. Someone had cut the power to her apartment specifically. In the sudden darkness, Sarah fumbled for a flashlight. I had to protect my family and figure out if this was Miller's doing. We gathered in the living room, away from the windows. I could hear David's rapid breathing next to me. The emotional toll was heavy. Seeing my children and grandson so frightened broke my heart. I called Detective Miles, my voice barely a whisper. She said she'd send a car immediately. The pressure was suffocating. Miller was making his move, and we were trapped. Just then, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Darkness comes for everyone, Eleanor." It was him. He was toying with us. But then, Mrs. Gable called my cell. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I saw a man lurking around the electrical box for your daughter's building. I took a picture with my phone and called the police." She described the man. It matched the deputy who left the box on my porch. This was a witness placing one of Miller's men at the scene. I relayed this to Detective Miles, who was on her way. Within minutes, police sirens wailed outside and flashlights' beams swept the hallway. Officers secured the building and restored the power. When Detective Miles arrived, she told us they had arrested the deputy based on Mrs. Gable's photo and his own quick confession under pressure. He admitted Miller ordered him to scare us, but when they went to pick up Miller at his known location, he was gone. He had vanished, leaving behind his phone and car. The tension was palpable. Miller was in the wind, and now he had nothing left to lose. With Miller missing, the hunt intensified. I had to cooperate fully with the police to ensure he was found before he could harm anyone else. The next morning, we returned to my house under police escort. The place felt different, violated. I needed to reclaim my home and my life. I had lost my peace of mind. Every creak made me jump. Detective Miles set up a command post in my living room, coordinating the search. The pressure was still there, a constant undercurrent of fear. Robert arrived with news. The arrest warrant for Miller had been signed based on the private investigator's testimony and the new evidence. They were charging him with forgery, coercion, and witness intimidation. But without the murder charge, it felt incomplete. I provided the photo Jake found to Detective Miles, who said it strengthened the case for a motive in the disappearance of Mark Talbot. As we were discussing this, my landline rang. I answered, and a voice I didn't recognize said, "Eleanor Reed. I'm a friend of Mark Talbot. I heard what's happening. I have information about what Miller did, but I need to meet in person. Come alone to the mill in 1 hour." It sounded like a trap, but it might be our only chance to get the truth. I told Detective Miles, who insisted on setting up a surveillance operation. She would have officers hidden nearby, but I had to be the bait. I agreed, my heart pounding. As I prepared to leave, David grabbed my arm. "Mom, you can't do this. It's too dangerous." I looked at my son, his face etched with worry, and knew I had to see this through. But when I arrived at the mill, the place was deserted. Then my phone buzzed with a text. "Look up." I did, and saw a drone hovering overhead, with a small package dangling from it. It dropped the package at my feet and flew away. Inside was a note. "You're too late. He's already won." I stood frozen at the mill, the note in my hand. Miller was still playing games. I had to prove he hadn't won and bring him to justice for Mark Talbot's murder. Detective Miles and her team swept the area but found nothing. The note was a bluff, designed to break my spirit. Back at my house, we regrouped. My hope was dwindling. I felt older than my years. But then, a break. The private investigator, under full immunity, revealed that Miller had a storage unit under a fake name. He said Miller kept souvenirs there. Detective Miles obtained a warrant, and we all went to the storage facility. The pressure was high. This could be the key to everything. The unit was filled with boxes of documents, but in one we found Mark Talbot's wallet and phone, along with a journal detailing his disputes with Miller over illegal business deals. It was the evidence we needed for the murder case. As we were celebrating, my phone rang. It was Miller, using a blocked number. His voice was calm, cold. "You think you've got me, Eleanor? I have one last move. Check your grandson's school." He hung up. Panic surged through me. Jake was at school today. I yelled for Detective Miles, who immediately dispatched officers to the school. We raced there, my heart in my throat. When we arrived, the school was on lockdown, But Jake was safe in the principal's office. Miller had called in a fake bomb threat to distract us. But his ploy failed. He had shown his hand. As we hugged Jake, Detective Miles got a call. Miller had been spotted trying to board a bus out of state. He was arrested an hour later, without incident. The nightmare was over, but the healing had just begun. The weeks that followed were quiet. Miller was in jail, facing multiple charges, including murder. The district attorney assured me his case was strong. I spent my days slowly putting my life back together. My house felt like a home again, though sometimes I'd startle at a noise. David and Sarah visited often, bringing groceries and laughter. Jake helped me plant new flowers in the garden, his presence a balm to my soul. One afternoon, Robert came by with the final paperwork, officially clearing my name and dismissing all the fraudulent claims against my property. We sat on the porch with lemonade, the sun warm on our faces. He told me the community was rallying, and a new sheriff had been appointed, promising transparency. I didn't feel triumphant, just weary and grateful. I had lost some trust in people, but I gained a deeper appreciation for my family. That evening, we all had dinner at my house: Sarah, David, Jake, and even Mrs. Gable, who had become a dear friend. As we shared stories and laughed, I looked around the table at the faces I loved. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. I knew there would be court dates ahead, but for now, I had my home, my family, and my peace. I went to bed that night, feeling the weight of the ordeal lift, finally able to sleep without looking over my shoulder. The future was uncertain, but I was surrounded by love, and that was enough.